Today's fishing enthusiasts are often seeking an elusive prize. Quality fishing is not a sure thing. But there is a way to ensure better fishing, good food to eat, wildlife enhancement, and more fun. It's called pond management, and it involves paying careful attention every step of the way, from pond construction to weed control. It's sort of like growing a backyard garden. You wouldn't think of throwing your vegetable seeds onto a weed-choked lot. You take care to prepare the soil and to weed and fertilize. Only then could you expect to reap a good harvest. Proper pond management takes time too, along with a lot of work preparing the site, keeping weeds out, fertilizing, and stocking. But the benefits are a bountiful supply of fish and fun. Just getting started? Let's start at the beginning. Getting in on the construction of a pond gives you a great chance to make sure it's built the right way. For specific information and assistance, contact your county USDA Soil Conservation Service office. The SCS will help you in soil testing, layout, and design of your pond. The area which slopes directly to the pond is called the watershed. Rain falling on the watershed flows into the pond. The watershed should be large enough to keep the pond full, but not so big that excess water regularly washes through the pond. The amount of watershed necessary for each pond acre varies greatly depending on soil type, slope, vegetation, and rainfall. Each surface acre of pond should have 10 to 20 acres of watershed if this watershed is pasture. It should have 10 to 30 acres if the watershed is forested. If your watershed is too big, you can dig a diversion ditch around one side of the pond to direct water away from the pond. Pond edges should be at least 2.5 feet deep. This keeps water weeds from growing in shallow areas. Have you ever seen a muddy pond? You can't see through the muddy water, and neither can beneficial plants. A watershed that is poorly maintained results in erosion. This can muddy the pond and eventually fill it with silt. Mud in a pond affects temperature, disrupts spawning, and reduces microscopic plant life because it cuts out sunlight, all of which can lead to poor fishing. If the watershed of your pond is eroding, you need to plant a cover crop. Disc and fertilize the area, then sow the kind of grass seed recommended by your county extension agent. Ponds built on cultivated watersheds may have serious problems with erosion and potential pesticide contamination. A buffer zone of grass around the pond may prevent some eroded soil from reaching your pond. However, pesticides sprayed on crops always present the possibility of a fish kill. If livestock use the pond, they can damage the pond edges, eroding the banks and encouraging the growth of water weeds. Livestock can also seriously damage the pond dam, so it's important to control their access. Place water for livestock in troughs below the pond, not in the pond. All unwanted or wild fish, like shiners, shad, bullheads, crappies, and green sunfish, must be destroyed in newly constructed or renovated ponds before you can stock your pond with the right proportion of desirable fish species. It's like weeding your garden. If you don't do it, you can't be assured of a good crop. There's a right way and a wrong way to get rid of unwanted fish. Your county extension agent or state district fisheries biologist may recommend a material called rotenone that will kill wild fish. Eating these fish is probably not harmful to people or most livestock, with the exception of pigs and ducks. Also, livestock can safely use the pond as a source of drinking water. If your pond can be drained down to a smaller pool, the amount and therefore the cost of rotenone will be greatly reduced. Early fall is a good time to get rid of wild fish. After the unwanted fish have all been destroyed, you'll have to wait at least 3 weeks before you can stock with hatchery fish. If the pond is to be fertilized on a regular basis, stock 1,000 brim fingerlings per acre during fall or winter. Brim used can be 80% bluegill and 20% shellcracker, or all bluegill. Then during late May or early June, stock 100 largemouth bass fingerlings per acre. If the pond is not going to be fertilized, stock only 500 brim and 50 bass per acre. Fish for stocking can be obtained from a private hatchery or contact your county agent for information on the location of private hatcheries. Now you can also stock channel catfish in bass brim ponds. They must be bought from a private dealer. Stock only 50 to 100 per acre in fertilized ponds and half that many in unfertilized ones. In ponds that contain large bass, stock catfish longer than 8 inches, otherwise they could be eaten by the bass. A word of caution about some other fish species. Bullheads, golden shiners, shad, and crappie are not good for small ponds because they overpopulate and take natural food away from the bass and brim. These species will almost always cause serious management problems. Why is fertilizing a good idea? Well, for one thing, fertilizing ponds can increase fish production 3 to 4-fold. In fact, you can produce up to 300 or 400 pounds of fish per acre in a well-fertilized pond. Fertilizer provides nutrients for microscopic plants called algae. Algae are the start of the pond's food chain. Algae are in turn eaten by microscopic animals called zooplankton. Fish eat zooplankton. Brim and young bass eat the insects, and bass eat brim. At the top of the food chain, there's you, the angler. Simply put, fertilization increases the number of fish available for you to catch and eat. Algae growth in fertilized ponds makes the water turn green. This growth, called the algae bloom, helps to shade the pond bottom, preventing the growth of troublesome rooted weeds and a type of undesirable filamentous algae commonly known as pond moss. A word of caution, do not fertilize your pond if you have aquatic weeds in it. We'll talk about weed control a bit later. Right now, let's take a closer look at fertilization. Fertilizer manufacturers are required to list the grade on each fertilizer container by the percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus as phosphoric acid, and potassium as potassium monoxide. Therefore, a 20-20-5 grade fertilizer contains 20% nitrogen, 20% phosphorus, and 5% potassium. Phosphorus is usually the limiting nutrient in pond water. Without phosphorus in the water, algae will not grow. Nitrogen in combination with the phosphorus is sometimes needed in new ponds. Liquid fertilizers are superior to granular fertilizers in promoting rapid growth of algae in ponds if applied properly. This is because the nutrients go into solution more quickly, making them more rapidly available to the algae. Also, smaller applications of liquid fertilizers can be used, which may reduce the cost of pond fertilization. Any grade of liquid fertilizer can be used as long as approximately 4 pounds of phosphorus are applied per acre per application. Liquid fertilizer is heavier than water, and since you want the fertilizer to mix with the water and not sink to the bottom, you need to use care in application. Another method of application is to pour the liquid fertilizer into a large container or tub at the pond's edge. Dilute it with 10 parts of water to each part of fertilizer, then slosh or spray the mixture onto the pond surface. You can also pour the liquid fertilizer and water mixture directly into the turbulence caused by an outboard motor. Pour it in near the prop. Or you can use the outboard motor's prop to create a suction through a venturi. Route a hose from the liquid fertilizer-filled bucket inside the boat down to the underwater prop. The action of the prop creates a vacuum that literally pulls the fertilizer through the hose into the water. Granular fertilizers also work well at recommended rates, but have a different set of application rules. When using granular fertilizer, you want to avoid direct contact between the fertilizer and the pond mud, because phosphorus in the fertilizer becomes trapped in the mud, which means it isn't available to the algae. A fertilizer platform positioned 1 foot underwater can be used to hold granular fertilizer off the bottom. You can either place open bags on the platform or pour the fertilizer onto it. The granules will slowly dissolve and water currents will distribute the fertilizer. A platform measuring 45 square feet is adequate for up to a 10-acre pond. Smaller platforms can be used in smaller ponds, and more than one platform should be used in ponds larger than 15 acres. As a rule of thumb, make your first application of fertilizer in late February or early March. Follow with 2 additional applications at 2-week intervals. Then make 3 more applications at 3 to 5 week intervals. If spring rains cause excessive water flow through the pond, it may be best not to fertilize until the rainy season is over. Continue applications at monthly intervals or whenever the water clears enough that a white disc called a Secchi disc attached to a yardstick is visible to a depth of 18 to 24 inches. Suspend fertilization by the last week in October. Remember, this is only a guideline. Because pond conditions vary, needs vary. You may need to modify standard fertilization schedules and recommended rates for your particular size and type pond. Over-fertilization may lead to an oxygen depletion. Once you establish a fertilization schedule, you need to stick to it year after year. Stop fertilizing and the fish starve, because an unfertilized pond simply can't produce enough food to feed the number of fish living in a pond that was previously fertilized. Now what if you fertilize and your pond still doesn't turn green or doesn't stay green for more than a few days? It may be that your pond water is too soft and your bottom mud is too acidic. If you don't get an algae bloom after 6 to 8 weeks of proper fertilization, you may need to apply lime in order to reduce acidity. Lime increases fish production in ponds with acid bottom mud and soft water, just as it increases crop yields from acid soils, because it makes phosphorus and fertilizer available to the algae. Phosphorus promotes the growth of algae, which, as we said earlier, are the base of natural fish food production in ponds. You can quickly determine whether your pond needs liming with a simple water testing kit available from fish farming supply houses. The kit measures total alkalinity and shows whether a lime application is needed. The number to watch for is 20 parts per million total alkalinity. Anything less than this indicates a need to add lime. Generally, the farther the water is below 20 parts per million total alkalinity, the better the pond will respond to lime application. It's a good idea to test your pond's alkalinity before fertilizer application. That way you won't be wasting your time applying fertilizer when you need lime for the fertilizer to work. While the test kit can tell you whether your pond needs lime, it cannot tell you how much lime to add. That information is provided through a chemical analysis of the bottom mud. You can take soil samples in a full pond by using a boat and a sampler made by attaching a can to the end of a long pole. Of course, it's easier to collect a mud sample from a dry pond. In each case, you simply take samples along an S-shaped pattern over the entire length and width of the pond. Take 3 to 6 samples per acre from ponds more than 5 acres, and at least 10 samples from small ponds. Samples should be about the same size. If your sample is dry, thoroughly mix all the individual samples together in a container. If the mud is damp, spread it onto a smooth surface so it can dry. After the combined sample dries, gently pulverize it and place some in a soil testing box. You can get this box as well as a special soil information sheet from your county extension agent. Be sure to clearly write fish pond on the soil information sheet and soil box. Then take it to your county extension office or send it to this address. For a small fee, the soil testing lab will analyze your sample and give you a detailed lime recommendation. New ponds can be limed before they are filled. Spread the needed amount of agricultural limestone evenly over the dry pond bottom. In ponds that already contain water, best results usually come from applying lime across the water surface. This can be done in small ponds by spreading bagged limestone from a boat. In larger ponds where several tons of lime are required, a platform can be built on the front of a large boat, between 2 boats lashed together, or from a pontoon boat. Bulk limestone can be loaded on the platform and distributed across the pond surface with a shovel or washed off the platform with a water pump. Take care not to overload the boat or it may capsize. Although the best time to apply limestone is during late fall and winter when fertilization has been stopped, you can lime acid ponds anytime if it's deemed necessary. Liming in the fall gives lime a chance to react with the acid bottom muds before the spring application of fertilizer. Most ponds in acid soils with moderate water outflow will probably need lime every 3 years. One method that usually works well is to apply whatever total initial lime application the soil testing laboratory report calls for, and then apply 1/3 of that amount during each following year. This ensures that the lime requirement is always satisfied. Remember our earlier tidbit about weed control? Proper fertilization leads to good algae blooms, which block sunlight reaching the bottom, which prevents water weeds. No sunlight, no weeds, right? Well, hopefully yes, but realistically, most ponds are going to have some weeds. While a good growth of algae is your first line of defense, this fellow could be your backup. He's the grass carp. The grass carp, or white ammer, is from China. While the grass carp likes soft-stemmed submerged weeds best, he'll eat filamentous algae or pond moss too. The grass carp can also control floating duckweeds, and when properly stocked at recommended rates, grass carp do not interfere with other fish. Stock 5 white ammer per acre. If bass are in the pond, make sure the grass carp are at least 8 inches long or longer. Otherwise, your weed eaters could wind up as lunch for their larger neighbors. Also, as grass carp get large, usually in 5 to 7 years, they will no longer eat much and may need to be stocked again if weeds start to reappear. Anytime you see new weed growth, you probably should add 3 to 5 more grass carp per acre. Once your pond is built and stocked and fertilized, it's time to think about keeping the fish populations in balance. This requires a delicate hand and a bit of self-control. Do not fish your pond during the first year after stocking. Bass harvest, in particular, must be carefully controlled every year, especially in small ponds, because bass are often very easy to catch. Take out too many, and the pond can be thrown out of balance. There are many ways for this to occur. In one type of out-of-balance pond, there are too few bass and too many brim. This usually occurs when the bass have been overfished. When there are too many brim, the bass are no longer able to prevent the brim from eating their eggs during spawning season, so the bass population dips even lower. Also, when there are too many brim, they don't get very big because there's just not enough food to go around. At this point, the fishing is ruined, and usually the fish must be partially or totally renovated. But have the pond checked by a qualified fisheries biologist before starting renovation. A good bass limit for the first year of fishing is 25 pounds per acre in fertilized ponds or 10 pounds per acre in unfertilized ponds. Bluegill can be fished more heavily. 4 to 5 pounds of bluegill can be removed for each pound of bass removed. Keep good records. Catching bass is most of the fun, so release them to catch them another day. Once the limit is reached, preferably over several months, start throwing back all bass that are caught. Remember, these are only general recommendations. Ponds vary greatly, so keep good records and proceed cautiously. There's another common type of out-of-balance pond. Too many small bass, very few small bluegill, and some large bluegill. While the large bluegill do spawn and produce young bluegill, there are too few of these that reach intermediate size. The fry that are hatched are eaten rapidly by the many small bass. This has two effects. One, the small bass are not left with enough of a sustained food supply to grow, so they do not grow. Two, few young bluegill are left to mature and become adults. If you're catching a few big bluegill and a lot of small bass, all about the same size, your problem is more than likely crowded bass. You may be able to correct this pond balance problem by removing large numbers of small bass. It's a good idea to review your harvest records every year. If you have doubts about the condition of the pond, then you need to run a balance check. To check balance requires seining. During early summer, seine several shallow areas of the pond with a 15-foot minnow seine. If you catch both bass fingerlings spawned during March to May and recently hatched bluegill fry, your pond is probably in balance. If you don't find bass fingerlings or bluegill fry, but you do find a lot of 3 to 5 inch bluegills, your pond is probably out of balance, and you may need to change your management or renovate. But have your pond checked by a qualified fisheries biologist and get his or her recommendation first. At this point, most pond owners want to know, is there anything else I can do to make my fish grow faster or make them easier to catch? Well, there are a couple of things you can do. To make your fish grow faster, you could feed them a commercial fish food. Bluegill and catfish will readily eat commercial fish feeds. Feed in the same place each time and feed at least 5 days a week, but feed no more than 10 pounds per acre per day. If you feed your fish, you will probably not need to fertilize, but use your Secchi disc to check the bloom and fertilize only as necessary. You can also build artificial reefs for your pond. These reefs can be constructed of brush, wood, concrete blocks, tires, and other materials. Reefs do not produce more fish, but attract fish for fishermen. Finally, as a pond manager, you might want to know, what problems might I run into? Oxygen depletions are probably the most common and severe pond problem. These can kill most or all the fish in the pond. Oxygen depletions can be caused by several conditions: a turnover, a bloom die-off, or the rapid decaying of weeds after a chemical treatment, or if large quantities of animal manure washes into the pond. In any of these conditions, the oxygen concentration in the pond drops. Water color turns dark brown, black, or milky, and the fish come to the surface gasping for air. As a pond manager, seek help from a qualified fisheries biologist and aerate. Aeration is accomplished by mixing air and water together so the oxygen will be absorbed into the water. Water pumps and tractor-powered or electrical aerators can be used to increase the oxygen concentration in the pond. Aeration must be continued until normal oxygen concentrations return to the pond. If caught in time, good aeration can save some or all of the fish. Properly managing a fish pond may take some extra time, but that's a small price to pay for the good times and good eating that come your way today and for years to come.
And whenever you can, take your kids fishing for the fun and excitement of it.
Got him, I got him. Got him, yay. That's yellow. Fishy.
Yeah, we'll get it back.
Okay. Hit the worm. I already got it.
No, we'll need that other bobber.
All right. Can get right here.
When did y'all start band practice then?
Hey, get this. John, will you get this fish off? Brett. Quit wiggling, Brett. Thank you. Yeah.
Hold him up and show him to the camera. There's one. You got one. Just bring it over to the camera a little bit and put him back in the water.
What? Not there. I can't take this one. I don't know what to say. I don't even touch it. David, think about it. Keep touching it. Can I walk? I thought Casey caught him.
Yeah.
Casey's fish. Do you want me to get it? I'm not. Come here, stupid thing.
All right.
Don't wiggle. Come here. Yeah, pretty fish. I gotta get this thing out of here if we want to live. I don't know what comes out. Oh, Grace. Michael, help me!
The preceding program was produced by the Alabama Cooperative Extension Service.